this and share my screen and we will dive on in. All right. As we're getting set up today, let's build a little bit of community in the chat. So if you are comfortable and would like to share in the chat your name, your title or role, the organization that you're representing, and maybe your geography, where you're based in the world, that would be great. And anything that you're hoping to get out of today's conversation, or sort of why you decided to arrive and be here with all of us. Again, just a little backstory for folks who are signing on and attending right now. We decided to have this be the content as one of our first free offerings this year because we are seeing so many organizations, if we look historically at the data over different federal election years, that it's really difficult to fundraise and to see the same type of resource flow at the end of the year, given the election in November. Some organizations see an abundance of it because people participate in sort of reactionary or rage giving around particular issues or geographies or topics. Other organizations really struggle because donors are delayed in making decisions, or we see people not participating as much in different events and activities. So we're going to talk about spring and summer because, believe it or not, if you all can believe it, it is March 6th, 2024. Where did those first 2 months of the year go? And how can you really leverage the events that are coming up to not only raise money and mobilize resources, but really build up the social capital of your organization. We talk a lot in our work at Right Collective about how important it is to be great stewards of the relationships that surround your work. And a lot of what you'll hear from me today is about communications, is about relationship building, but there will also be some little transactional nuggets of wisdom, hopefully, too, that help you to think about how you're actually structuring the ways in which people give surrounding your events. So we're going to start off today kind of talking about this, let's say, left brain, right brain, or the art and the science of this. I think the first part we're going to focus on is the art behind it. Every event that you put on should feel like some sort of experience or opportunity for a community to get to know who you are. This is why I've tended over the years to stay away from some of the road races, galas, more transactional vehicles with clients, unless we really root them in an experience and a conversation that ties people into who you are and the impact that you're having in the world. So while it's important to think about some of these mechanisms and vehicles and that we've done traditionally over the last couple of decades, it's also really important to think about how is yours unique and different, and what's the experience that you're offering to people so they walk out of that room after 2 to 3 hours. They really understand who you are, what you do, the community that you're creating, and how they can participate in your work into the decades to come. So let's start off by talking a little bit about that experience and how it's sort of framed in some of these trends that we're predicting in philanthropy and in the economy, sort of in the socioeconomic landscape as well for 2024. There are obviously many more beyond these, but these are some that our agency, our collective has decided to focus on because we feel like, one, they resonate with our values, and two, they're some of the, let's say, lowest hanging fruit for us to work with organizations around. Most of the organizations that we work with are between a $500,000 and a $10 million budget. So they're all kind of small to mid-size organizations. And many of them don't have a 5, 10, 15, 20 person development team. I don't know, again, if that's something you all want to sort of share in the chat. It's always helpful for me to know and reflect on, and maybe follow up with some of you that are a less than 3 person development operation, because there's really some specific things I think for you this year to be thinking about and focusing in on if you don't have a larger team working on the fundraising activities. So let's talk about a couple of these trends. So again, first, just naming here, and this is also recorded on our website. We did a full webinar about a month ago now on how it's a federal election year and what the data and the trends were surrounding the last 3 federal election seasons for philanthropy and for nonprofits. So you can reference that fully. But I think the biggest one around events is really avoiding having any strong fundraising activity around events from October to December. And also communication. So another thing I'll just sort of pepper with here is making sure that the week before and the week after, you're not sending out your year-end appeal. You're not sending out your save the date for your 2025 anniversary event. It's a really noisy year and it's a really noisy time from October to December. People are very distracted. And so it's really important for you to think about, yes, you could have an event between October and December, but don't be putting, a third of your events budget into that basket and having that event around November 15th. So that's really important to think about, which is again why our focus today is on spring and summer events and how you can basically pre-plan between now and that time in the fall to have some success. The other thing to share is that while it's gone up a little bit from last year, the middle class are still really struggling and household giving is still down from what it was pre-pandemic and from what it was even in 2021. So because of that, we're seeing a lot of success with our clients creating monthly sustainer programs. So the donors that used to give you maybe $250 in a spring appeal and $100 in a year-end appeal have dropped down to being $5 and $10 and $20 monthly donors because one, they need to budget their philanthropy and manage it more effectively. And two, because those amounts are ones that, if they had to cancel it at any time, it's a little easier lift for them to think about. So we're seeing a lot of success with donors who, if for the last 2 or 3 years your fall appeal or one of your fall events has trended on the low side or hasn't grown, you might want to really start to think about that monthly sustainer program. And what does that mean for your events this year? What are the engagement opportunities, the gatherings that you shape to support building that type of donor base? We have one client right now here in my home state of Maine who has over 30,000 monthly sustainers that give between $1 and I think the highest one is like 200 and something dollars a month. And it's profound cash flow for the organization, as you can imagine, to support their work. So again, just giving you a dream state. If you've got 5 monthly donors right now and you get to 10 by the end of this year, that's
But I'm
awesome.
on a different call. Shut up.
I definitely wanted to have that be something that I share with you.
Sorry.
All right. The next thing is diversity and donorship. So there's really amazing, again, as we sort of all apply a JEDI, justice, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging lens to our work, we sort of think about philanthropy and funders as moving and evolving beyond the identities of solely the like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett's of the world. Donors of color, women donors, younger donors, there's a lot of diversity in donorship now. And so inviting new philanthropists to the table to host events is particularly important. We see a lot of clients and organizations creating young professionals networks or youth giving circles. We recently had a young woman, I think she's 17 or 18, who hosted a fundraiser for the organization, and her uncle matched whatever the group raised, and it was a little over $20,000 that she brought in through her fundraiser with the match from a family member. We've also seen a lot of networks, like there's a network called the Donors of Color Network, where donors of color are organizing now as they accrue wealth and also get more involved in philanthropy on behalf of their communities for racial and social justice causes. So really, you might turn to board members or you might just turn to your top handful of high net worth folks to host events throughout the year and do house parties, but really try to think about some diversity in that donorship. You tell a story with how you fundraise and how your values are reflected in that, as much as you tell a story around your program and the communities that you serve. The next trend to think about is, which has actually been trending for the last few years, is some of the top things economically that people are spending their money on. So again, as you're sort of thinking about different companies to partner with in the community or fun things to incorporate into your events, the top 4 things that they're predicting Americans spend money on in 2024 are apparel, skincare, nutrition, and wellness. So I'm not saying everybody, run out there and, do a fundraiser just on skincare or just, partner with the, local wellness organization. But these are some of the things that board members could really help you with, or other volunteers or advocates as the year goes on, to make those types of partnerships in the community or incorporate into events. So again, we find that a lot of clients actually not only generate some additional revenue, but have some real success in getting their brand and identity out there by selling swag. People will buy hooded sweatshirts and t-shirts and baseball caps and dog leashes, those little dog poop bags. Like last year, we had a client that sold like 100 of those at an event, and then everybody was seen walking around the Boston Common with their tie-dye dog poop bag from the organization, poop bag holder. So just think about some of those things in this space. And again, what's trending economically? If somebody is searching skincare and there's 5 companies that you could potentially have one be associated with your organization, you can do a give back or something, or have that be incorporated into an event. So just wanted to name that as kind of an economic trend that we're seeing. The other piece is we're still in a really tricky landscape for hiring. And so companies across the board are struggling with employee retention and employee recruiting and retention, no matter what the industry. And so we are seeing a lot of companies, particularly some that we work with on the East Coast, that have actually reached out to us to say, hey, like, could you design something for Earth Day? Or is there an opportunity for you to come and for our company to have a specialty table at your gala event or whatever it might be. So if you're thinking about, some of the trends this year in terms of partnership, you might really want to be thinking about, what is the case that you're making maybe to some of those companies? And also, how are you asking for financial support? Because if you're like me, who's been fundraising for 15, almost 20 years, I've been asked often by many companies to put in a ton of time and energy to things that don't actually come with any financial support or significant financial support. So maybe that's a conversation for you to have. Do you design an employee giving day when the gift is 10,000 and plus or 5,000 and plus? And does it equate to the staff time and energy that goes into that? So just things to be mindful of, but also a great way to drive this trend around monthly giving. So one of the conversions that we've seen success with over the last 2 years is when we do a corporate day and 30 people participate and we get a $5,000 or $10,000 gift or sponsorship from the company. And then we follow up with those individuals that participated in that day and invite them to be $5 and $10 monthly sustainers. So again, we're building pipelines to other opportunities by way of focusing in on and actually, supporting some different companies and industries in our area in retaining their employees and also giving folks a really fun experience in the community. And then the last one, and I'll share my experiences both having done a lot of projects in Park City, Utah over the years, and also myself just living in Maine, which is coined as vacation land. The population in my town is triple what it is after Memorial Day weekend than it is right now. So I'm enjoying a little bit of the quiet before all the tourism and the seasonality sort of arrives. But really helping people, if you do live in an area where tourists visit, or if you do live in an area that has a certain seasonality to it, everybody comes in for the Boston Marathon, or everybody comes, to upstate New York for this particular race or whatever it might be. Finding ways to partner with the tourism industry in the community to help people have fun discovering new places. One of the trends that we've seen in several reports is that, again, this is just on the rise in our economy throughout the US. I think since 2020 and 2021 and all that time quarantining, people are still getting really excited to get back out there, discover new places and spaces. And rent and travel around a little bit. So again, just something for you to think about as you're thinking about these trends is what kind of partnerships could you potentially create to that industry to have some more successful summer events this year than you ever have before. So let's dive a little bit more into the art and the experience that people will have at your event. So here's where I've been kind of bummed out over the years when I've gone to events. I've gone to a lot of events that are anniversary events, or that are framed as sort of like a catalytic moment, a founder transition, or the launch of a new program. And while it's really great to hear about what that organization is doing, or hear about the reflection of it, it's always a little bit hard when you go to an event like that to feel like the frame the organization is bringing is about more of what's happening in the world, more about what's happening in society. What's the movement or the story or the conversation that's a little bit bigger that you're a part of? A lot of nonprofits tend to operate in silos. They talk a lot about their own message, their own impact. They share their own presentations, their own history. And I think it's really important to think about this more from an ecosystem perspective. What is the entire, movement that you're in surrounding gender justice or animal rights or conservation or whatever it might be. Getting a little bit more expansive as you think about this experience can bring other stakeholders, thought leaders, people to the table than just, oh, I'm just going to that one event for, for this one particular organization. So one of the questions I think you should ask before you even start talking about, are we going to do a gala or a road race or a house party? Is what is the story or conversation that you want to tell with that event? Who do you want to tell it to? And what is the experience that you're offering to attendees? The second that I walk into your space at your event, I should feel immersed in the community, the culture, the vibe, the energy, the excitement, the joy, whatever those feelings are. I shouldn't walk in and immediately be like, oh, this is another nonprofit fundraising event. Look at all the table tents with their logo, right? Like, not that you shouldn't have those things, but being really mindful of the experience that you're offering to folks. Um, One of our clients this year decided to shift from doing something more formal at a hotel that they used to do to actually designing a ropes course because they design adventure courses for young people, to actually designing a ropes course that's going to be part of an outdoor event in the summer where donors and participants and community members actually get to come in. And the way you get into the event, if you want to, obviously, is going through part of their ropes course experience. So again, how are you immersing people in what you're doing and making it fun? And having it be part of the narrative, right? Like when I was in my early 20s, I co-founded an organization called the Recovery Theater, where we partnered with the Vermont Circus School. And we had young people who were going through struggles with addiction and their mental health um, participate in jumping off a trapeze and learning to climb silks for the first time. And then our fundraising events were all around inviting people in the community, to jump into the new year with us and to come jump off the trapeze and then have some really fun snacks and conversation on the lawn, right? So how are you immersing people more in what you're doing and giving them the experience, again, whether it's a physical activity or a social activity or a curriculum, how are you really offering that experience to them? That's part of the art of these events. I will never forget the events that I've gone to where around girls' education, where I've walked in and I've pulled out of a hat my age, the school I'm at, and the subject I'm studying, and being given actually like a part of the curriculum or an activity to facilitate. I'm immediately back in my 12-year-old body, remembering what it was like to learn about something for the first time. And then I can parallel it to the experience that the girls in the program are having and really get a sense as I walk away of how intentional this organization is in creating community and making sure I know the work they're doing in the world and the impact that they're having. So that kind of feeds into these last two pieces. One is, how are you creating community at this event? How do people have a sense of belonging? I love participating in events, and a lot of donors over the years have shared with me they love when they kind of go to an event for the first time, don't know a lot of people, but are given a buddy or a question or find this other attendee in the room and ask them about their experience going to Kenya to visit the program. Just how are you kind of pre-planning so you can foster community at that event? Um, a lot of organizations, again, I think, and it could be capacity, but this is a great role for a volunteer, have them think about some of these things. And it's a couple of emails that go out prior to the event and it says, here's your buddy you're going to meet in the room. And they're going to share with you the three things about why they're involved in our project in Kenya, or what they've learned after a decade of being involved in our work, or something like that. So creating that type of community with intentionality goes a long way, and I think is really meaningful for people. And then, sometimes I think, again, I want to be mindful of everyone's budget, but you want to really think about what's something super memorable that people will, again, walk out the door of your event at 8:01 p.m. And never forget. Like, what's that one memorable thing in the room that they did, that they saw, that they heard, that they'll never forget? So often we tend to think about that as kind of like the speaker at the event or the program. It can definitely be part of that this year. Really think about like, what's that thing people need to hear at our event in April, May, or June, or that person they need to connect to, or that activity they need to participate in, um, that they'll be talking about for the rest of the year. What's that memorable activity? It can also be something, again, for less formal events where my daughter and I participated in a Mother's Day fundraising event a couple of years ago where the organization had us collage and handmade cards to each other with like all these sort of different images of like powerful women and quotes and fun things on them. And then we exchanged the cards to each other. And I mean, they were hanging up in my house at the end of the year, and I remembered the organization and made a donation to their year-end appeal, right? So think about the activities and the things that you can bake into throughout the year where people say, oh, I loved doing that with my child, or my partner and I had such a great time at that, hearing that speaker. Try to think about those things and think about it from your own perspective. Like, would you come to your own fundraising event as you're planning it right now this spring or summer and walk out the door and wake up the next morning and go, oh my gosh, that was the most fun, wonderful, joyful, exciting thing to be a part of. So here, just some questions to be asking around the experience this year. So another thing just to think about, to dive a little bit deeper into this conversation story piece is, what is your event truly about? And what does it set the stage for into the future? So I'm kind of leaning a little bit here into those of you who might be, again, celebrating a milestone event of some kind or an anniversary of some kind. Um, but while it's wonderful to come and see a timeline of the history of the organization, the people in the room that come to this event are asking also too, what are you doing next? What's on the horizon? So one of the biggest missed opportunities I see for organizations is they have nothing to announce, right? So they kind of show up at the event and there's no new leadership, there's no new strategic direction, there's no sort of bold statement about what's coming next, or we just did some research and here's some things that we learned in the last 10 years and here's how it's going to change as we set it up for the next 10 years. So really just think about the story of your event and what it's catalyzing for people to say, oh my gosh, I totally want to be a part of their work for the next couple of years, or I'm going to pay more attention. And, I was going to unsubscribe to their newsletter after I left today because I get way too many, but now I'm going to keep reading it. You want people to have those types of reactions where in the room with you, as much as you want to honor the past and the work that's been done. I think it's also, again, this sort of movement ecosystem. You're part of something bigger than just your one organization or your one mission. Where are you headed next into the future, right? So we're doing a lot of work right now with birth center infrastructure throughout the country and sort of reimagining healthcare. And even though we're working very particularly with a lot of Black midwives to help them open birth centers, we have conversations with other community care infrastructure firms or organizations. So we're really trying to shape a conversation from a bigger place in space where we're talking about how healthcare is crumbling in America and we all need to reimagine it. We're not just staying in our silo of talking about our particular project and maternal health. We're talking about it as part of a bigger pie. And I think that's something for you just to consider and think about at these events, is how you help people expand on their knowledge and understanding of the broader movement or ecosystem that you're in. And then the last two things are kind of connected as you think about storytelling. Invest some resources in storytelling. If you have the money to do it, if you have someone to, you know, make some comic strips or create a magazine, or, think about a new and different way to tell your story. People, I mean, I say this in my very millennial part of who I am. I think we have, us millennials have like a 90-second attention span and then we stop reading. which is probably true. Um, but I think it's really important to think that that's a trend. People are more likely to look for visuals. People are more like, and that's also part of access, right? Like, you want there to be other ways you communicate than putting paragraphs of story out there that folks read. Make a short video. Think about audio. Um, we have a client who actually, a couple years ago in New Hampshire, wrote a play about the history of the domestic violence movement in New Hampshire. And as part of the anniversary event, they staged elements of the play at the anniversary event. And it was just so amazing to see that theater incorporated, instead of reading a handful of stories in a brochure. So think about that and how the stories are connected, again, not happening in silos. And how does it really, again, catalyze a new conversation for your organization to have, and perhaps new and different ways to communicate to new and different constituents. So to kind of wrap up this portion, as you're thinking about the experience you're offering to attendees, if you want to bring this back to your team or you want to bring this back to the board, think about how will people feel immersed in your work and your impact the moment they walk into the door. So again, thinking about the whole event as an experience. How do they arrive? What are they given? How are the name tags laid out? People used to think that I was a little a, a little ridiculous, but one of the things I used to do in my early days of fundraising when I was manning the table up front, was make sure that the name tags were part of the organization's creative practice or their community building practice or whatever their practice was. So it wasn't just you walk in and pick up your name tag. It was you create a name tag as part of a little mini art project at a table, or your name tag has the opportunity for you to add an identifier or add some sort of quote to it. But a lot of people said to me, especially around the arts oriented piece of it, that they loved that when they walked in, the first thing they got to do was, take 3 minutes and collage a name tag and personalize it to themselves before they went into the event. Um, the next thing is think about what activities in the room will connect them to your impact and to each other. So again, being really clear on the answer to that second question. And then lastly, again, how will they feel that your event is unique? So sometimes when we do messaging overall for organizations around fundraising and development work, people need to know your what's unique and different about you. Or, and how do they again feel that at your event? What is part of your secret sauce? What makes you different? For a lot of organizations, I think sometimes it's the team that you have around your work. One of my favorite things that we did last year was a live impact report with a client that my brilliant colleague Allison Yoder structured and put together for one of the organizations we work with in the greater Boston area. And it was so cool because instead of just like a static document that went out, we brought it to life. And the most memorable thing that people took away from that was we had every staff person share their personal why of why they worked at the organization in sort of a round robin, quick 10-minute, everybody got 90 seconds to do so conversation. And people said, wow, your team is really unique and really impressive and really here for the right reasons. And that ultimately will make it easier for us to talk in the long run about investing in our team and helping us retain them because they're phenomenal. So it could be something that's more internal. It could be something that's super external to your program. Maybe you're the only organization in the area that's incorporating adventure science into cancer care, whatever that element might be. So just make sure people leave with real clarity around that, because it's important for them to feel a sense of what that is that you're gathering. So here are some best practices, and don't laugh at my very sad search late at night for what photo I should put on this slide. But I included iceberg lettuce because I'll be honest with you, I go to so many events where the food is iceberg lettuce and boring. Like if I have to go to another gala where I sit down and I just eat like a very sad salad, like I'm gonna scream. Um, so I've heard this also too from a lot of folks, like I think we think sometimes about, these events through a lens of, really, what location will people feel like it's worth the $150 or $100 ticket? Um, I've raised more money in the days following up after an event when we've had the wicked cool new food truck in town, drive up to the plaza, some fancy tables set out on the green, and everybody gets to try new cultural and ethnic cuisine for the first time in an environment that has, some performing arts elements or some people standing up and sharing stories in a really unique way. So, try not to do standard things in your program that people expect. I always have a really hard time, and I've actually heard this from a lot of bigger funders over the years. They can't stand when the corporation gets up just because they were the lead sponsor and gets to take over 10 or 15 minutes speaking in your program, right? Because they're not really connected to impact. It's more of a transactional relationship. If you do have a company that's a really vested partner, totally have them come up and speak from a personal place. But when they stand up and they're reading from a script and it sounds very corporate, it can feel like, again, that was just a fundraising mechanism and, they're not really rooted necessarily in the community they're working with, but it's a very sort of funder centric, transactional type of thing to do. So think about short, direct programs. Another piece of feedback that actually like we've gotten over the years and we also see in a lot of research is when your program is more than 30 minutes or it's not concise or the transitions are kind of wonky and off. When someone leaves the stage or when someone sits down on the couch, someone else should immediately stand up. There should be like smooth transitions. And you're probably hearing a little bit too much of my theater directorial self in this, but it is an art form to create a really beautiful program, to have it feel seamless. And to create an event also too, where people feel like that type of intentionality was there because you wanted people to be completely captivated for 20 minutes. You didn't want to have them, sitting there sort of staring at their empty glass for, 3 or 4 minutes while the, bank president gets up to speak and reads from a script. So just think about how it's, again, a short, direct, compelling program. Again, over the years, I've heard folks say I still would have given $150 if they served me a 3-course meal from a hotel, or if they served me some really cool, ethnic cuisine in a pita pocket or something like that. So just making sure that the food and beverage aligns with your values, aligns with your community, and make sure that it's really good. I know that sounds super silly, but we do a lot of surveying, and one of the top things that comes back is the food and beverage was poor at the event. And I think people do really care about that. Spotlight stories and people genuinely and with dignity. So as some of you on this call might know from attending other trainings with me, or we've worked together in the past, my own story is being the scholarship kid from rural Massachusetts that was paraded around to raise money by sharing my story of how difficult my life was growing up. And so many times I remember being asked to get up and talk about, how horrible it was and how much the organization helped me. And then afterwards, the board chair stood up and said, "You can help kids like Alyssa." So I'm rooted in a place where I never felt like I got to actually share my own story. I was even scripted as a, for lack of a better word, beneficiary or program participant over the years. So I always make sure that it is an invitation to anyone in the program that wants to speak. I make sure they say what they would like to say. And also, treating anyone else again with just that sort of dignity and respect. Yes, it's important for the, executive director or the CEO or the co-CEOs to have certain talking points and to share certain things about the organization, or for staff to as well. But if you're going to share the stories of the people in the community that are benefiting from and in partnership with you around mission, make sure that you do it in a really genuine way, and they're sharing what they want to share about the work. Sell some cool stuff. So again, like I love that event that there's some events I've gone to where they had an artist make greeting cards, and you got to walk out and you could buy a pack of handmade greeting cards on the way out, from a local BIPOC artist who had created them. And so just think about selling some cool stuff. Again, you don't want it to be a huge distraction in the space if you're making this focus 110% fundraising, but think about some things that you could share. Maybe I'm just from New England, so I like me a good hoodie, like have a good sweatshirt, or a beanie, like some of those winter caps. But think about it beyond also to like the t-shirt or the sweatshirt or the baseball cap. What are some unique items that could be branded to your organization, or again, incorporate arts and community? Keep your print material simple. People don't read a lot. They don't read a ton at events. You should see the glove box of my Prius at the end of the year every year. It's filled with brochures from fundraising events. And I'd say most of them I throw out unless there's a reason to save them. Reasons to save them are there's a suggested reading list, a recommended reading list on the back with a QR code. There's a really wonderful picture of the program or some of the work being done. Um, I do tend to throw the ones that are like the seed packet, the postcards that like are perforated and they have seeds in them and you can plant them in the ground. I do tend to throw those in the garage, and I'll look at them in the spring and say, oh yeah, that environmental group or whatever it might be. So think about keeping your print material simple. And if there's a thing, something to incorporate into them, that makes people keep them beyond just the information about your organization and how to be in touch about what you do, add that to it. Um, there's another one downstairs that's on the fridge right now that I look at every day that has 3 quotes on it for working parents, or 3 reminders for working parents. Goodness, that's my mantra, with 2 little ones in the house and a third one on the way and still working full time. I look at that every day and I'm so grateful they put that on the back of their postcard. So think about that. Like, what are some of those things and reasons why people would keep a collateral after an event beyond just learning about what you do? And then obviously, really think about your values around inclusion. How are you creating inclusive space and accessibility? I still have colleagues who write to me and say, I went to that event for that organization that, works with young people who have intellectual disabilities, and they still didn't have these things in place around the program. So they were accessible to anyone with an intellectual disability or a physical disability. So think about that. How are you really incorporating your values into the event and into the event's activities? All right, so we are at 12:40. I'm going to take about 10 more minutes to discuss the strategy piece, and please feel free to start to pepper the chat with any questions that you have as we're going along, and hopefully we'll have about 10 minutes at the end for me to cover some of those. So let's talk about the actual raising resources, moving money piece of the work. Um, you cannot create an event this spring or summer and try to have it be a be all catch all. So you can't create an event that's for major donors, program officers, corporate, and also potential monthly sustainers, and necessarily have it be really successful around the benchmarks that you're trying to hit in your fundraising plan. So do try to be somewhat tailored. You might be able to have two or three audiences in the room potentially for an event, but I would say even do two or three smaller scale events for specific constituencies than one big catch-all for everyone. So really just think about what donor audience is this event for, right? If you're inviting families like mine to come to an event, we're probably your monthly sustainer, or maybe my company is a potential corporate sponsor into the future, right? So just be really mindful, like what donor audience is this for and who are you inviting? And then what's the right ask? So again, I've had folks in the room before who are high net worth or ultra high net worth, have family foundations or work at different types of foundations, go to events and say, I'm not the person to come to an event and like, cut $100 check. Like, I'm really curious, like, where's this organization headed, and could they benefit from a six-figure grant? If you are not maybe necessarily understanding what audience is in the room at the time, you want to make sure you're shaping a couple of asks that are particular to them. So you might want to say, if you're creating a certain event, you might want to make sure that you're talking about, if we could raise 1 million over the next 3 years, we would be able to do X. That's a great one-liner to say at an event if there's institutional partners, major donors, high net worth folks in the room. And then on the flip side, if it's a very community-oriented event, you might want to say, we really want to build up the social capital of this organization to always be able to organize around the most important issues facing our community. We're hoping everyone today here in this room could become a $5 monthly donor, and it will allow us to do X, right? So really think about those targeted message, because that's where you can have more success. And then the two biggest things, which again, I'm calling in my colleague Allison from her home base in Providence, Rhode Island today as I'm doing this webinar with you all. One of the things that comes out of every development audit, I think, that Allison and I have done together over the years, is that the staff time is not in the budget for the event, and it's never worth the ROI. So you could have a $60,000 a year salaried person who spends 50% of the year planning an event. That's $30,000. That nets the organization 100K and costs the organization 50K. You just paid someone for the entire year to work on an event that raises you $20,000, right? So is that worth it to you? So really thinking about the budget around these events and the staff time put into it worth the return on the investment, and communicating that to board members and other folks that are helping you plan the event. We actually, one of the events over the years that we've sort of sunset in a lot of organizations is golf tournaments, unless we can really raise unrestricted and corporate partnership around it. Because often between the costs associated, the staff time put into it, and then the actual revenue that comes in, if you put all of that into the pie, it actually doesn't have the same return as it might you doing something else with that community and then following up afterwards to ask their companies to be annual sponsors, and the families and golfers associated with it to be individual donors. So just be really clear on that and ask yourself if you can predict the ROI easily, and why or why not. And ROI is return on investment. So sorry for the jargon. um, all right. All right. So how do I determine the best way to raise money around the event? So the first question to ask yourself is, who is the event for? Again, don't try to have too many different constituencies in the room. If it's a purely celebratory event that you want to mention several things at, that's fine. But if you want to be targeted around a specific element of your plan, like we want to get, 50 monthly donors this year, maybe create a very specific event and gathering that's going to be a part of that. I do also suggest the monthly giving earlier in the year this year, with spring and summer events as being a focus. because once we get into the fall again, you might have some of those donors already signed up to give 10 bucks a month or $25 a month, and you don't have to worry about making sure that their $250 check comes in between October and December when it might be a little bit more of a fragile time. Consider why they give to your mission. So we work with several organizations who the majority of the donor base supporting the work are families or alumni of the program. So just know, like, if you have a subset like that, they might have their own specific event or their own specific messages surrounding the event that you design. How do they give and how much can they give? So again, this is really important as you're thinking about events. A lot of organizations a couple years ago completely got rid of the envelopes in the room. They were like, we're not doing that anymore. We're just going to do QR codes and, a website link or an app. We actually reintroduced printed envelopes and the ability for people to leave checks with the development team at the end of an event into a couple events last year. One of the events saw an additional $8,000 come in from that maybe we wouldn't have gotten because people weren't going to use a QR code. So know that you have a multi-generational audience, that some people will want to use the envelope, will want to cut a check. Other folks will want to scan a QR code. It kind of also just sits in around access and opportunity. You want everyone to feel like they can participate in giving. And then the other thing is, really asking, like, what will compel them to give, and is it easy for them to give? If this is an event that you've run in the past, and you haven't done any surveying around it, please survey people like in the next 30 days before your event is happening. Write to everyone who bought a ticket or came last year or the last couple of years and say, did you feel compelled to give in the room? Why or why not? What made you give a donation? Why or why not? And was it easy for you transactionally to give that gift? One of the things we find in development audits time and time again is that folks have trouble figuring out how to give when they go to your website, when they go to your social media, when they're at an event sitting at the table. Again, maybe this is a little bit of the science fitting into the art piece too. Make sure that the experience people have in the room, it is seamless and easy for them to know how to support you. So again, that's where things like QR codes can be helpful. A really clear table labeled at the entrance that says, don't forget to make your investment before you head out tonight, with a basket of envelopes or a square card reader, whatever you're going to use. But just make sure that, if you do want to do some surveying, this is a great question to add in, and, people will give you realistic feedback around that. And then just for those of you who are more seasoned fundraisers, you probably already know this, but the fundraising success surrounding most events is in pre-planning. So every time I do an event, if the goal is $10,000, I've already raised 5 to 7K before that event even happens in the room. I call up donors ahead of time. I secure corporate sponsorship. I make sure I hit my ticket goals. If I'm doing a paddle raise, or if I'm doing any kind of like solicitation in the room, like a fund a need, I try to pre-plan at least 50% of that before it happens. If I'm making an announcement of we're launching a monthly donor program, I make sure that if I want to get, you probably can't always get 50% because it's a little trickier with that type of model. But if I want to get 20 people to leave the event of 50 as monthly donors, I might ask 5 or 6 people ahead of time, would you announce in the room, or would you raise your hand and sign on and say, I'm going to do it, to kind of build that peer momentum and energy. So again, you always want to pre-plan as much as you can before the event actually happens. We inherited some fundraising, giving some fundraising support surrounding an event a few years ago. They were reimagining their event coming out of 2020. And one of the things that came out of that reimagining of that event was realizing that so much of what they had done was not pre-planned. And so the year that they did it in the room, where people didn't participate as much as they could, they actually had a deficit on what they spent on the event. They lost money running the event. So you really want to be able to track ahead of time at least 50% of what you're going to secure at the event. And then afterwards, if your event is this fun, meaningful, awesome, joyful, cool, unique experience that people have never had before, block off your calendar for 2 weeks after that event and free it up. So you can literally, in the next couple of days, email, call, knock on doors and say, thank you for coming. Thank you for sponsoring. Let's grab coffee. What'd you love about the event? Did you hear the speaker say that? free yourself up after your events to have a couple of weeks where you're not going back into like the chaos of your regular schedule to build meaningful relationships, to offer other engagement opportunities, and to do follow-up communications. I think the biggest missed opportunity sometimes too, people say to me, "Oh, how do I find new board members?" You probably had about 30 to 40 people in the room after your big event last year that were so fired up to volunteer. If you had met with them in the week or two after the event, would have likely said, "Yeah, I'll consider a board role. Here's when the timing would work for me." So just remember, if you're catalyzing a moment, take advantage of that energy, clear that calendar, and make sure that yeah, you're ready to rock and keep building relationship. And then, gosh, this photo is so horrible. Stock images. That's okay. I'll change it up soon. This guy is supposed to be saying, who, me? But yeah, you, each of you, each of you should have fun at your own event. So that's the other thing is if you're not enjoying your event, if you're not translating that energy and that spirit out into the community, I actually learned a really hard lesson. I was 25 years old, running a fundraising event on the Upper West Side of New York. Um, I'll never Manhattan. I'll never forget. Two donors came up to me after the event because I was sweaty, my hair was a mess. I was pushing that dolly with like 25 things of print materials on it out to a van out front to like stock the car. And I was on the verge of tears because the event was so stressful and understaffed. And two donors walked up to me and said, "I can't believe the organization let you run this like that." And they said, "I'm so sorry." And I'll always remember that because how you take care of your people surrounding the process, people in your community pay attention to that. They see when someone is stressed out. They see when someone is burnt out. They see when someone is overwhelmed and not enjoying it and having fun. So, just a reminder that people will feel that sense of community at your event in every element of it. And you yourself should enjoy your own event, even if you're working it, and feel inspired to donate at it. If you were to go to your own fundraising event, would you cut a check at the end of the night? Would you become a monthly donor? Why or why not? So just remember to kind of have those check-ins and remember that you are also a critically important part of the process and part of the community. Just don't forget that. So I'm going to open it up to questions and reflections. I'm mindful we've got about 6 more minutes together. Thank you to all 56 of you who stayed with me for the last 56 minutes to share in this presentation. If you need to sign off, you're welcome to. If you want to stay on for Q&A, I can stay on for probably about 5 or 10 more minutes. And then I just wanted to say, please join me in June. If you registered for this, you'll get an email. I will be back June 24th from maternity leave, and June 26th we'll be with you all again on another free webinar from Right Collective, and that link will go out in an email in the next couple of days from our awesome marketing team. And if you're interested in partnering or working with us in any capacity, if you've got a big event on the horizon, you're looking for some support around it, you can reach out to Andrea on our team at info@rightcollective.co. And with that, I'm going to stop my screen share